Today, the topic that we are going to discuss is how to be happy. How to be happy is, of course, an important topic that we should think about, but most people don't know how to be happy because from our young days we have learned to be dominated by emotions. This is the reason for this. When we are born, out of all the animals in the world, the child or the infant of the human being is the weakest of all other animals. A fish, of course, just born begins to swim, and even other animals who are on land, they begin to walk about, sometimes even run in a few days. But the human being, when born, takes so many years before the human being can run or even walk and even talk. All this is making the human being feel weak. And when they feel weak, they begin to imagine that the normal adults are strong and weak. Now, a psychologist called Alfred Adler, he began to point out that because of this, people develop what is called an inferiority complex. You begin to feel inferior to others as a child, and this makes the person feel inferior even after growing up. Even after we have grown up, we begin to feel inferior. Most people, they begin to feel inferior, so they can't even do things properly, because in their imagination they are inferior. This is called the inferiority complex, and some people, to compensate for that, they begin to act as if they are superior. And by acting as if they are superior, they begin to create problems for other people. And other people begin to hate that person as a result. And then more trouble begins. So this kind of thing also happens. But at the same time, because we begin to behave in the wrong way, we create unhappiness for ourselves as unhappiness to others. But this is only one of the problems. Now some other psychologists have begun to realize that we have two parts of the mind. One part is the emotional part, and the other part is the thinking, reasoning part. So we think it is the same thing, but it's not the same thing. These are two different parts. And the Buddha also recognized these two parts. The thinking part, the Buddha called mano. And that emotional part, the Buddha called chitta. So mano and chitta, some people think, means the same thing. These are two names for the same thing, what we call the mind. But that is not so. These are not really two parts of the mind. There is no such thing as mind. That's another thing to understand. When this thing called psychology began, psychology means, psych means the mind, and logy means the study of the mind. But very soon the psychologists began to realize there is no mind to study. They couldn't find the mind. Even if you open up the body, now these doctors, when they go for training, they have to get a dead body and cut into pieces and find out what is inside. But still, no one has been able to find a thing called mind. So a certain philosopher who came from England, he started saying, there is no such thing as mind. There is only the body. And the psychologists started saying there is no mind to study. So they defined the word psychology as the study of human behavior, because that is all that we can study, the behavior. There is no mind to study. You see, but the Buddha used three words to refer to the mind. And the Buddha recognized that there is no such thing as a mind separate from the body to talk about. What he called the mind is an activity of the body. Body has certain activities. Now, the heart beating is an activity of the body. Breathing in and out, that is also an activity of the body. Now, whatever is eaten, it goes into the stomach and from there into the intestines. Those are also activities of the body. The blood circulating all over the body, that is also an activity of the body. So the body has different activities. Now in this body there is another part which is called the nervous system. It is this activity of the nervous system that we call the mind. One important part of the nervous system is the brain. So the activity of the brain is a part of what we call the mind. Now we also have what are called the senses, 5 senses: the eyes, the ears, the nose, the tongue, and the body itself is a sense organ. The whole body, the sense of touch. But that is also an activity, the activity of the senses. When we open our eyes and see things, that is the activity of the eye. When we hear sounds, that is an activity of the ear. When we smell certain smells, or maybe perfumes, or even evil smells, all these are smells which are activity of the nose. When we taste food, that is an activity of the tongue. When we touch something and feel the touch, that is also an activity of the sense of touch. So like this, there are different activities, and that also comes under the mind. And another activity is where we become angry, or we become passionate, lustful. What is that? That is also an activity. That is also part of what we call the mind. So when we talk about the mind, there are really 3 parts that the Buddha used 3 words to refer to those. That emotional part where you become angry, or whether you have a desire for something, or whether you get frightened, or you begin to worry about something, all this emotional activity is what the Buddha called citta. And the thinking part, which is the activity of the brain, the part of the brain called the cerebrum or the cerebral cortex, all this is the activity called thinking. But this is also an activity that the Buddha called mano. And the sensory activity, seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, touching, that is what the Buddha called vijnana. The English word is perception. So vijnana, usually people translate that as consciousness. But the real meaning of vijnana is perception, not consciousness. So it's very important to understand this. What we call happiness, what is that? What we call happiness is normally a state of the mind, a mental state. So, you see, it's very important to understand that when we speak about the mind, we are not speaking about an entity. The body is an entity. When we say entity, we are referring to something that occupies space and time. And when we speak about an activity can occupy time. We may speak about an activity occupying space, but it's a different thing. An activity just comes and goes, comes and goes. Like a flame. Now, when we speak about a flame is an activity. Even the movement of the fan is an activity. Even if I shake my hand, that is an activity. But the problem is, what we call the mind is an activity, not an entity. The body, when we speak of the body, we are speaking of an entity. Now, if we speak of the engine of a car or motor vehicle, an engine, now that whole engine is an entity. But when we switch on the engine, an activity begins. That is an activity. But you switch it off, the activity stops. So an activity is a thing that can begin and stop. So you see, what we call the mind is like the activity of the engine, and the body is like the engine. This thing called the body is really a form of engine. It's like an engine, it works using the same laws that govern an engine. So an engine we can call a machine. But when we speak of a machine, we are speaking about something that the human being has created. But when we refer to the body, it is a natural creation. Not that there was a creator to create this, but the important thing is that the natural process, how it's like a seed growing into a tree, or a human being is also starting from a seed that grows into a human being. But still, it works like the machine. Although the human being we don't call a machine, but we can call that an organism. The word organism is used to refer to this natural machine, which we call the human body. It's not only the human body, the animal bodies are also organisms. Even a plant is an organism. These are all the natural machines. That's the only difference. But they work using the same laws that govern all natural phenomena. You see, this body is like the machine, and the mind is like the activity of the machine. So it's very important to understand that. And still, what is it that we call happiness?